At 10:12 on a Wednesday night in September 2025, an 18-person rescue crew arrived at 3987 Paradise Road in Las Vegas. The address is next door to the Sphere, a few hundred feet east of the Strip. It used to be a Gordon Biersch brewery and restaurant. Now, it was a boring company construction site, a tunnel opening cut into the earth, surrounded by fencing and equipment. Somewhere underground, a worker had been pinned between two 4,000-foot pipes. Clark County Deputy Fire Chief Carlito Reyes confirmed the call. Crews descended into the tunnel opening, loaded the man into a Stokes basket, a rigid wire litter designed for extracting injured people from confined spaces, and used an on-site crane to hoist him back to the surface. He was transported to Sunrise Hospital with a broken pelvis. The boring company had purchased the 2.5-acre site in June for $10 million. It was intended to become a Vegas loop station serving the Sphere. The tunnel he was pulled out of belongs to the same system you may have seen in videos. Teslas gliding through neon-lit tunnels beneath the Las Vegas Convention Center. The futuristic one. The one that was supposed to change how an entire city moves. Most people who ride the Vegas Loop see neon lighting and a quiet Tesla ride between casinos. What they don't see is the other side of this project, the one documented in OSHA complaints, county violation notices, and investigative reporting. Worker injuries going back years. Chemical burns severe enough to leave permanent scars. Nearly 800 environmental violations. $500,000 in fines for dumping drilling fluids into city sewers. Safety citations that were issued by the state and then rescinded shortly after a call to the governor's office, according to Fortune. And an internal company email written by one of their own people that said it was only a matter of luck that nobody had died yet. All of it drawn from public records, regulatory filings, and investigative reporting. This is what's been happening inside Elon Musk's tunnel project. The Vegas Loop was pitched as something revolutionary. 68 miles of underground tunnels, 104 stations, casinos, hotels, the airport, the convention center, all connected by Teslas running beneath the surface, faster than traffic, cheaper than a subway. Clark County approved it. The Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority partnered on it, paying the boring company $4.6 million to manage and operate the first stretch. Boring Company President Steve Davis compared it favorably to conventional transit, pointing out that a mile of subway tunnel elsewhere in America costs somewhere between $900 million and $5 billion. A short initial loop opened beneath the convention center in 2021. It worked. Passengers liked it. And then the real expansion began. Outward, underneath the resort corridor, beneath Paradise Road, toward the Westgate, Encore, Resorts World, and eventually dozens more stops across the valley. Everything that follows happened during that expansion, underground, out of public view, beneath one of the most watched entertainment corridors on Earth. The promise was futuristic. The conditions documented in federal complaints and state citations were something else entirely. The first cracks appeared in 2023 at the Encore tunnel site. Workers started filing complaints directly with Nevada OSHA. What they described was not a single malfunction or a one-time accident. It was the working environment itself. Ankle-deep contaminated water in the tunnels, a slurry of chemicals, grout, concrete, and construction debris that workers waded through on a daily basis. Accelerants used in the concrete mix had been sprayed onto workers during boring operations, soaking through their clothing and absorbing into their skin. Up to 20 employees reported chemical burns, rashes, and irritation. There were no showers available on site for workers who had been doused. Muck bins, the containers used to haul excavated material out of the tunnels, were overloaded and, in some cases, collapsing, blocking the egress paths workers would need in an emergency. According to OSHA's report, a concrete mixture including bentonite, fly ash, and Portland cement was being pumped through the tunnels at a rate of 12,000 gallons per day. Workers had not been provided with adequate protective equipment. Many had received no training on the chemical hazards of underground construction. OSHA investigators documented the conditions and issued 8 citations, with proposed fines exceeding $100,000. Agency records show that 42 Vegas Loop workers reported injuries that year. Cuts, sprains, burns, and rashes caused by tunnel accelerants. Workers had been reaching out to OSHA since at least October 2023, telling investigators they were concerned about chemical exposure and that their complaints were being ignored on site. The Boring Company contested every single citation. Their legal team sent a letter stating the company believed OSHA had failed to establish that the alleged violations occurred and contested the classifications, the penalties, the abatement deadlines, all of it. They denied the conditions as described and disputed the inspector's findings across the board. But that was only the beginning. During the same construction push, the same summer, the problems moved above ground. On June 15, 2023, Boring Company workers were digging near the Westgate Resort when they accidentally cut too close to a pillar supporting the Las Vegas Monorail, column 50, near the Westgate's valet entrance. A worker using a seining machine, roughly the size of a small excavator, dug through gravel, earth, and landscaping and exposed the column's foundation. The monorail was running at the time, carrying passengers. Clark County regulators declared the area an unsafe structure and ordered the monorail shut down while a third-party engineering firm assessed the structural integrity. A former Boring Company employee who was working nearby at the time later told Fortune he saw a handful of men in suits arriving on site, pointing and looking at the exposed column. The monorail reopened the next evening after a construction company poured cement over the base. A few months later in October, boring workers exposed a second monorail column, column 47, while doing grading work on the same property without the required permit. Clark County issued 3 violations for the 2 incidents. 2 different types of documented failures happening at the same time, workers getting chemically burned in the tunnels below, a public transit system nearly destabilized above, same expansion, same summer, same company pushing forward on every front at once. And then the environmental record surfaced, and the scale of the problem changed completely. ProPublica documented nearly 800 environmental violations tied to the Vegas Loop over a 2-year period. The largest share, 689, were missed mandatory site inspections, but the remainder were not paperwork oversights. Drilling fluids and untreated wastewater had been dumped into Las Vegas manholes and onto city streets. Oil-like drilling waste was found in municipal drains. Regulators documented untreated groundwater spilled onto public roads and never reported to authorities. The company had started excavation before permits were finalized and failed to hire the independent environmental manager required under a prior settlement agreement. That settlement, signed in 2022 with Nevada's Division of Environmental Protection, was supposed to impose stricter compliance. The Boring Company signed it. Then they broke the same rules. The Clark County Water Reclamation District fined the company roughly $493,000 after inspectors caught workers discharging drilling fluids directly into sewer cleanouts and manholes at 2 separate sites. When inspectors arrived at one location and directed the workers to stop, the workers refused. The next day, the company appeared to comply. But according to the violation notice, a company manager resumed the dumping after assuming the inspectors had left the property. The county described the behavior as feigning compliance. County crews ultimately had to clean 12 cubic yards of drilling mud from a sewage treatment facility that had suffered what the district called substantial damage to its infrastructure. Regulators had the authority to levy more than $3 million in penalties. The state's Environmental Division chose to reduce the amount to approximately $242,800, applying a formula of 2 $5,000 fines per permit and citing the extraordinary number of violations. A UNLV public policy professor told ProPublica he doubted the enforcement system was working, not if they're recommitting almost the exact violation. Around this time, a local television crew spotted something unusual at a Boring Company construction site on Paradise Road. A deep, bright green pond roughly the size of a tennis court, sitting in an open pit beside a visible egress shaft. When news cameras arrived, workers on the site rushed to add a black tarp to the chain link fence surrounding the pond and layered material over the razor wire on top. One worker approached the news crew and said, "I know what you are. You're fake news." The Boring Company posted on X that the pond was a temporary construction feature used to balance loads during subsurface concrete work. The state's environmental agency said no testing was conducted because there was technically no discharge happening. When reporters asked for documentation, the agency said no formal records had been filed. The pond eventually disappeared. No official testing results were ever publicly released. That would already be a staggering record for any infrastructure project in America. Chemical burns, collapsed muck bins, a monorail nearly undermined, 800 environmental violations, inspectors who reported that workers continued dumping after being told to stop, a settlement signed and then broken, fines that should have been millions reduced to a fraction. But what happened next is where this story stops looking like a construction scandal and starts looking like something deeper. In December 2024, 2 Clark County firefighters entered the Vegas Loop tunnels for a training exercise, the kind of underground drill fire departments conduct to prepare for confined space rescue scenarios. Underground rescues require specialized preparation, and firefighters need to know the conditions they might encounter. What they encountered was a toxic chemical muck that pools at the tunnel base, a residue of the boring process, a slurry of the same accelerants and construction chemicals that had been burning workers for years. The substance filled their boots and burned through to skin. Both firefighters were hospitalized with chemical burns. According to Fortune's investigation, the injuries left permanent scars. Retired firefighter and battalion chief Mike Pilcher, a 32-year veteran, later said he was deeply alarmed by what happened, and by what happened next. The Boring Company compiled a nearly 1,000-page response denying any responsibility and placing full blame on the Clark County Fire Department. The fire department maintained that they had followed every recommendation the company provided in the 6 safety meetings held before the drill. Around the same period, a former Boring Company employee who had overseen safety at one of the Vegas Loop tunnel sites went public with his concerns. He told a local news outlet that the health and safety of employees were being ignored. The problem is, this employer happens to have deep pockets, deep money that he can pay these fines and write it off like a business expense, he said. And that's scary. All workers have a right to a safe working environment, regardless of who your employer is. 5 months later, on May 28, 2025, Nevada OSHA issued more than $425,000 in citations against the Boring Company for the firefighter burns. The violations were classified as willful, the most aggressive designation available, reserved for employers who knew about a hazardous condition and acted with deliberate disregard or plain indifference toward the law. That same day, the same day those citations were served, Boring Company President Steve Davis called the office of Nevada Governor Joe Lombardo. He spoke with Chris Riley, the governor's infrastructure coordinator. Riley is a political appointee who had worked at Tesla for more than 7 years before joining the Lombardo administration. The following day, May 29th, a group of high-ranking state officials, including Riley and the governor-appointed director of the Department of Business and Industry, sat down with Davis and other Boring Company executives, along with a representative from the LVCVA. According to Fortune's investigation, the willful citations were rescinded before the company ever entered the formal appeals process that exists for exactly this purpose. Nevada OSHA's standard procedure allows companies to contest citations in writing and request an informal conference to argue for modification or withdrawal. None of that happened here. The citations simply vanished. Then something stranger emerged. A line item recording the May 29th meeting was removed from the public case file without explanation. When Fortune flagged the deletion, the state updated the case diary. But the revised entry described only a collaborative meeting with employer. It still did not mention that governor's office representatives had been present. Fortune further reported that 2 OSHA staffers who had worked on the Boring Company case were either demoted or written up afterward. People inside the agency now reportedly feared consequences for properly investigating the company. Former OSHA Chief Jess Lankford called the intervention absolutely not appropriate. The state denied any political interference, calling the allegations a misguided attempt to paint the process as corrupt. Federal OSHA later reviewed the situation, acknowledged that the allegations against Nevada OSHA were substantiated, but concluded the state was ultimately justified in withdrawing the citations because documentation errors and inconsistencies meant the elements necessary to sustain a willful violation were not satisfied. The case had merit, the paperwork didn't hold, and the fines disappeared. This is the part that reframes everything before it. The question stopped being whether the tunnels were dangerous. It became whether the enforcement system was working as intended. Fines that were withdrawn shortly after a call to the governor's office. A meeting record that was removed and later revised after reporters started asking questions. Staff who, according to Fortune, were disciplined after working on the case. A company that, according to Assemblymember Howard Watts, had not paid a single dollar in OSHA fines related to the Vegas Loop. Not $1. 17 complaints filed between 2020 and 2026, and 0 OSHA dollars collected. The nearly $600,000 the boring company had paid in total fines went almost entirely to the Clark County Water Reclamation District for the illegal wastewater dumping. The safety agency responsible for protecting workers had collected nothing. The injuries did not stop during this period. In July 2025, a worker was shocked by an electrical panel at a portable substation near the convention center. In September came the crushing injury on Paradise Road, the incident that opens this story. Construction was temporarily suspended, an investigation opened, and then the digging resumed. In April 2024, the National Council for Occupational Safety and Health had already placed SpaceX and the Boring Company on its annual Dirty Dozen list, the organization's ranking of the worst employers in America for worker safety. The citation covered Musk's companies collectively, documenting crushed limbs, amputations, chemical burns, and a preventable death. National COSH is a worker safety advocacy group, not a government enforcement body. But it placed the Boring Company alongside Tyson Foods, Walmart, and the Alabama Department of Corrections. There is an internal email that surfaced during Fortune's reporting. It did not come from Las Vegas. It came from a Boring Company site in Bastrop, Texas, sent to the safety manager. It read, "I feel that the company as a whole has been very fortunate these past few months that there hasn't been a fatality." That was not written by a journalist, not by a regulator, not by a political opponent. It was written by someone inside the company who understood the odds better than anyone. And then there is the quote from Musk himself. At a Cato Institute event in 2024, he called environmental regulations largely terrible and argued that rather than requiring companies to get permission before building, it would be much more effective to simply let them pay a penalty afterward if they did something wrong. Pay the penalty, keep building. That is almost exactly what the documented record shows happened, year after year. By early 2026, Nevada lawmakers had spent hours grilling state safety officials in committee hearings. The Boring Company declined to send anyone to testify, offering written answers instead. Assemblymember Watts told the Associated Press that the company acts like they are kind of above the law and want to play by their own set of rules. Congresswoman Dina Titus sent a letter to the governor demanding transparency and accountability. UNLV declined to host a loop station on its campus, citing the environmental and safety record. In Nashville, where the Boring Company had broken ground on a new tunnel project called the Music City Loop, workers from a subcontractor walked off the job over safety concerns and unpaid invoices, more than 100 days into the project, with only 5% of their bills paid. The subcontractor's owner told a Nashville outlet that payment terms kept shifting, and the company had only paid a fraction of what was owed. Safety violations were already being reported at the Nashville site as well. None of it slowed the expansion. On January 28, 2026, the city of Las Vegas announced the boring company had been cleared to begin building its first station within city limits, just north of the Strat. The project kept growing. There is no ghost story here, no curse, no paranormal folklore. What the Vegas loop accumulated instead is something harder to dismiss, a documented trail that kept getting longer. Chemical burns, a crushed pelvis, an electrocution, environmental violations by the hundreds. Fines assessed and reduced. Fines assessed and rescinded after a call to the governor's office. A meeting record removed and revised after reporters inquired. Inspectors who reported that workers continued dumping waste after being told to stop. A settlement signed and broken. Staffers reportedly disciplined after investigating. A green pond that appeared, was never officially tested, and vanished. An internal email about being lucky no one had died. A rider at the convention center who told a reporter the system was convenient, but that the tunnels scared her. "It's a good idea, but it scares me," she said. She wasn't wrong to feel that way. Not because the ride itself was dangerous. By every public account, it wasn't. But because the thing she was riding through had been built in conditions that regulators, investigators, and the company's own employees had been raising alarms about for years. The Vegas Loop works for its riders. 1 million passengers a year move through clean, quiet tunnels without a public safety incident. That is the product. That is what most people see. The question this record raises is not about the product. It is about what it cost to build. Who absorbed that cost? Underground, out of sight, in tunnels most of the public will only ever experience as a novelty ride between a casino and a convention hall, and whether anyone with the authority to find out was ever really allowed to try. The next station is planned just north of the Strat. The permits keep getting approved, the tunnels keep getting longer, and somewhere underneath the most famous stretch of road in the world, right now, tonight, someone is still down there working,